Wall Street Wrap-Up is supported by Bamboolas, featuring live music and coming soon, tapas and wine upstairs. Bamboolas, the heartbeat of Frenchman Street.
This week on Wall Street Wrap-Up, Hurricane Idalia slams into the Florida Gulf Coast as a Cat 3. With power outages and flooding throughout the state of Florida, so will insurance companies be able to stay? Today starts the beginning of the Labor Day weekend, and airports are expected to be packed. Hopefully those flying out won't be spending most of their holiday with delays or cancellations inside the airports. August job numbers are out today, and what is the latest unemployment rate, and is labor returning to work? So tonight, we're going to talk with the growing trend of workers working remotely from home with the Conference Board's Vice President of Human Capital, Robin Erickson. They just came out with a new survey of business owners of the growing trend of employees wanting to work from home. So will this trend continue to grow? I'm Andre Laborde. We've got these stories and more. It's Friday, and it's time for Wall Street Wrap-Up. Hi, welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up for this Friday, September the 1st. Hurricane Idalia slammed into the Florida Gulf Coast as a Cat 3 hurricane. Will insurance companies be able to stay in the storm-prone states? In the first half of this year, according to Swiss Re, thunderstorms accounted for 70% of the global catastrophic losses occurring. And last year was the 8th year in a row that the United States had at least 10 catastrophes that each cost more than $1 billion in losses. And insurers generally paid out more in claims and expenses than they took in premiums. Now, as businesses, that's just unsustainable. And those are insured losses. As for the uninsured Americans, 12% of U.S. homeowners don't have property insurance, and half of those have a household income of less than $40,000 per year. The biggest reason found is inflation is driving the cost of repairs and replacement, plus litigation and fraud are key factors. Some insurers are unable to raise premiums enough to cover losses, so they're pulling out of the state, as in some cases like Louisiana and in Florida. Now, if you have student loans, today starts the first day after 3 years that interest will begin to accumulate. Starting in October 1st, payments will be made with some exceptions. But just how much is the average student payment? The median monthly payment is $222 per month, and the average is just under $400 a month. Now, that's because some student loans are advanced degrees, such as medical and law school. Now, that's a lot more than doctors are getting paid a lot more, which skewers the average. 40% of student loans are accounts from advanced degrees. And the Supreme Court struck down Biden's plan for debt forgiveness, so now the administration is capping payments to 5% of monthly income, also eliminating monthly payments for minimum wage earners and not charging for unpaid monthly interest charges. So how did our money do this week? Well, the Dow led where the NASDAQ lagged. Dow Jones had its first week gain after 3 weeks, and the staples and utilities are the only negative S&P sectors for the week. Tech stocks led the week with that sector up more than 4%. Also this week, the Dow Jones, they closed today up 1.4%, and the S&P 500 closed this week up almost 2.5%, and the NASDAQ, they closed today just above 3.2%. The Bureau of Labor Statistics released job numbers and unemployment for last month. The stock market seemed to like the job numbers for August, with new jobs of 187,000 jobs added. July's payrolls were revised down 110,000 from last month, and unemployment for August rose to 3.8%, and hourly earnings, they rose slightly but less than it was for July. A new report from Goldman Sachs this week said that a quarter of the workforce, or 25%, may be working from home at least part of the week, maybe now even permanently. Now, that's down from the COVID's pandemic peak, where there was almost half, or 47%, of U.S. workers working from home. Well, this week, Amazon's CEO Andy Jassy told employees of the company it's past the time to disagree and commit to coming into work. If you can't disagree and commit, it's probably not going to work out for you here at Amazon. Well, that's plain and simple. So just what is the future of work going to look like now? Well, joining me tonight to talk about working from home or coming back into the office is Robin Erickson. She's with the Conference Board, and they've got a new survey out on this very subject. Let's talk about it. Hi, Robin. Welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up.
Hi, Andre. Thanks so much for having me.
Robin, I was thinking about you earlier today during breakfast, and I bet you're wondering where this is going, but I'll tell you what I'm thinking. This morning, where I always have breakfast in the morning, there's the cashier. And right next to the cashier, there was a little sign that said, "Help wanted, all positions open." And it really didn't surprise me on these other days because I've always seen that sign's been there for a while. And the Conference Board came out with a recent survey, and it said if my numbers are right, 73% of employers are having problems retaining employees. Is my number correct? And also, you know what I'm wondering? Is it only 73%?
We actually did just do a survey of 185 human capital leaders. And yes, your number is correct. We did find that 73% of organizations are having issues retaining workers. Believe it or not, that number is actually lower than it was a year ago because our survey series is every year. And we definitely still have labor shortages in the U.S. despite the slowing economy.
Larger cities like New York, as compared to Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco. Are you finding in your survey, are you having a better time retaining office workers more in smaller cities than, say, the larger cities, as in New York?
That we know that there are real labor shortages in the hospitality and the retail industries, as you were saying, service industries like the restaurant you were at for breakfast this morning. But during the Great Resignation that started in the spring of 2021, we also found shortages of professional and office workers. And so I think it just goes to show that we have a big labor shortage here in the U.S., despite our slowing economy, and it's affecting all industries.
Do you think with the COVID era of lockdowns was so huge, do you think going back to the pre-COVID we'll ever get back to now the post-COVID of workers actually going to work 5 days a week, or do you think this is now the new normal?
I think, as you just mentioned, millions of Americans had to adapt to work from home during the lockdowns. And many of them found that they were able to have some very needed flexibility in their lives. And we're seeing real reluctance now, even though it's quote unquote safe to go back to the workplace. We're finding that many employees still want some flexibility in their lives.
Who do you think, Robin, has the upper hand right now? Do employees have the upper hand over the employer, or is it vice versa? The employer now still has more sway?
If you think of an X, right, one side goes up while the other one goes down. That's what you find with voluntary turnover when tracked against unemployment here in the U.S. in the last 25 years. So what that means is that when unemployment is low, voluntary turnover is high, and people are more willing to take the risk of quitting their job because if it doesn't work out, they're pretty sure they can find another one someplace else. But when unemployment is high, voluntary turnover is low because people are concerned about leaving their jobs because you never really know how things will be at the next job. So I think as long as we have labor shortages and unemployment, I think voluntary turnover will continue to be high. So those organizations that are most concerned about finding talent and retaining talent, I think that they will be more interested and more willing to do what their employees are looking for.
Well, I'm wondering, Robin, with like an unemployment rate, and it's been consistent somewhat of about 3.6 to 3.5%, which is considered extremely low, then I would imagine, like what you're saying, is that we're going to have more employees having the upper hand.
When organizations can't fill their positions or they can't retain their employees, they're going to be much more concerned. And in fact, the Conference Board's flagship study every year is called the C-Suite Outlook. And we have found that attracting and retaining talent has been the number one internal issue for the last many years among CEOs.
In your survey at the Conference Board, when you're talking about recruiting and retaining talent, would I be correct in thinking like the paycheck, the money is the biggest way of recruiting and retaining, or are employees now looking for maybe other incentives?
I think once upon a time it was the paycheck that was the most important, or the annual bonus, the compensation. I do think now, though, that what you're seeing is that employees are valuing flexibility in addition to pay, right? In addition to promotion. You're finding that there's a third very high lever. And so today, organizations that are mandating on site work policies are actually finding it much more difficult to retain workers than those that give employees a choice about where they work. And we also found that offering hybrid work is important for attracting and retaining workers, especially younger workers, higher income workers, Hispanic workers, and Black workers, as well as the fact that women are more likely than men to prioritize flexible work schedules and locations. So I think that many organizations that are really concerned about retention or even finding employees are offering more flexibility. And it's definitely one of the first questions that's asked when candidates apply for a new job.
How about productivity? Is productivity the same, equal, more, less from a in office or in person worker as compared to a remote worker?
So that was one of our questions in this study. And we actually plotted remote work versus productivity here in the US since 2019. So 2019 through 2022 for the full year, and then first quarter of 2023. What we found that, and unsurprisingly, that from 2019 to 2020, the number of remote workers increased significantly. Uh, and so did productivity, right? So in 2020, we had the beginning of COVID, and millions of workers had to work remotely, those who could. And all of a sudden, productivity started increasing. So in 2021, we found the highest productivity. But at that point, workers were able to go back to the office. And so remote work was starting to decline. And so you have the highest productivity as remote work is starting to decline in 2021. And then in 2022, productivity declined slightly, but so did the number of remote workers. However, get this, in 2022, productivity was still above where it was in 2019. But there's some indication that workers may actually be more productive when they are working remotely.
I would imagine because they're happier or they're more content in their workspace. And what I assume also is that now with new type of technology, and I'm thinking of Zoom, I mean, for such as someone like you and I would never been able to do this interview before because we're in two different areas without having this type of technology. And now with working with Zoom, does this have a correlation?
Oh, I definitely think so. And there's new technologies all the time that allow for greater collaboration between employees. But I will tell you, as someone who's worked remotely for the last 15 years, I do know that you have to learn how to be a good remote employee. You have to learn how to get to know your coworkers. You have to learn, if you're a manager, you have to learn how to manage people. And so one of the things that we looked at here at the conference board last year was how to lead effectively in a hybrid work environment.
What about younger employees, Robin? You know, sometimes, and I'll refer to it as pre-COVID or the old way, you know, younger workers learn from the senior employees of what to do, what not to do, how to work with people and such. Today, with now more remote working, the young workers don't have that type of a hands-on training for even them, for the older worker to say, don't do that.
You could actually have a junior employee shadow you remotely. So how would that be possible? Well, you'd have to set it up in advance, but you could have a situation where you had someone sharing their screen. So for example, if you and I were writing a report together, you could share my screen and we could work on the outline together. And so there are ways to do some of that shadowing and knowledge transfer remotely. But I also think that it's really important for organizations to think about when they have their employees coming back to the office that they structure those interactions. And so think about, the office is the new offsite, right? So if you really want, new employees or the younger employees to learn from more senior employees, then set up learning transfer and also look at the collaboration tools that are available.
When it comes time for either bonuses or promotions, that a boss will think of, well, I know Robin or I know Andre or I know that they're always right here under my thumb as compared to somebody who's on a remote. Is that concern?
So there is a concern, but there's a but. So before COVID-19, there definitely were different hierarchies of workers where remote workers, I think, felt like second class workers in many situations, in many organizations. But then COVID sort of leveled the playing field, so to speak, in terms of having, pretty much all knowledge workers, all professional and office workers online remotely. And so I think that many organizations have started to incorporate ways of working that would include remote workers. And I also think that there's a little bit of responsibility on the shoulders of the remote worker to make sure that what they're doing is being either recognized, that they're on the projects that they need. But there's a little bit of concern that we could go back to sort of two hierarchies of workers. I think we have to be very careful that that doesn't happen if, in fact, this idea of hybrid or remote work continues on and for the next few years.
Robin, what about the morale of employees? I remember reading in the survey you were mentioning something about sometimes the morale of the employee is affected, but something like one out of every three workers has a longing of a sense of belonging, or has a, I don't know if I use the word loneliness, but needing. And I'm just curious about humans need interaction. Does remote work did you find that as a problem?
So that's actually a really good question, and we should go back and look at our data a little bit differently. But you're correct in saying that a third of the human capital leaders who took our survey said that their employees' sense of belonging and inclusion had decreased in the last 6 months. We also found that over 40% of them, of the respondents, said that their employees' level of mental health had decreased, their level of engagement had decreased, and that their the employee intent to stay had decreased as well. So I think when you're thinking about morale and you're thinking about all the things that go into morale, one of the most important things you can do in an organization is to ask your employees. Ask them, what's most important to them. Ask them, if what would help, what could get them to stay and what could get them to leave. You might be surprised at the responses.
I'm curious have there been surveys to find out? And I remember reading your survey, and it might have been mentioned in yours, but I wonder how many employers actually not only have a suggestion box, but actually read what's been dropped in it.
So I'll tell you something even more interesting. Since the advent of generative AI back in January, for those of us who do research, we are now able to take the answers to open-ended questions and not have to code them by hand. We're able to so an employee engagement survey, you can say, hey, what's most important to you, or what would get you to stay, and ask people to fill it in, right? An open-ended response. Generative AI will allow you to put all of those responses in and come out with the top themes. So it synthesizes information for us. And so I think organizations should definitely be using that when they're starting to look at the responses to open-ended questions. But also, if you're concerned about your ability to retain your employees, the best thing you can do is actually talk to them.
Robin, what about AI, artificial intelligence? In the last, I would say the last 6 months, give or take a month or two here, we've been hearing in the stock market so much about artificial intelligence, AI, automation, and such. Do any employees, especially maybe those that work remotely, have somewhat of a fear that if can my job be replaced? I mean, we're talking about self-driving automobiles. We're talking about maybe one day, now I don't know if I want to get in it, but maybe self-flying planes without having the pilot. You know, so if you can have that, what about employees that everything they go up in front of a kiosk to order a Happy Meal at your favorite fast food restaurant?
So the way I look at AI and changing jobs is much like I think the world used to think about electricity back before we had it, or the advent of the car. There's always fear of change, but I think that then gives uh, higher level positions, more critical thinking, more creative areas and jobs.
We talked about the service sector, restaurants, you know, grocery stores, that you'll find more of a need for employees as maybe others. And I'll bring up one, let's say the tech industry. You know, there are, last week they were talking about how one company was now mandating and I'll even say it was Goldman Sachs that said that they want their people in now 5 days a week. Well, it's one thing wanting it, it's another thing getting it. I mean, if there's people waiting in line to get that job. But for companies like tech or finance or other things like, other than what you mentioned before, like retail, restaurants, grocery stores and such, do you think that the employer has more of the upper hand?
I think it depends on how badly those people want to work for that organization. I
True.
do believe that those that don't agree, that those employees that don't agree with the workplace location policy that's being mandated, I think those who can will vote with their feet and will go someplace else. And we found in our survey, like I mentioned, that those organizations that are mandating employees return, they're mandating their office policies about where the work location, they're having a much more difficult, 25 percentage points more difficult time actually retaining employees.
What about college degrees? And we'll go pre-COVID as compared to post-COVID. You know, at one time there were many positions that when they were requesting an employee, they said a college degree is needed. At the conference board, did you do any kind of referencing as far as college?
So we didn't reference that in this study, but we have noticed that there's been a trend towards skills-based hiring. And what that means is that organizations are hiring more based on an employee's skills and competencies rather than they are just on their degrees. And so, for example, in some organizations, they mandate that a project manager has to have a degree, but they have people who've been doing project management without a degree, and they have realized that that's sort of silly, that years of experience could substitute for that degree. And so the other benefit, real big benefit of using alternative credentials rather than just degrees, like college degrees, is that you can increase your diversity. That was something else I meant to also mention with more remote work, is that you can expand your pool of workers. So that's another benefit of remote workers, is that you might not have to pay as much to get someone to go work in the sticks, because they could work remotely wherever they wanted to. But
Yeah.
yes, there's definitely a trend, as you said, around college degrees, and not as many organizations are requiring them as used to. And it increases diversity, and it also helps organizations find more workers.
A while back, we had one of our guests was Tom Gimbel, who was the CEO of LaSalle Networks. And he brought up an interesting point that I never thought about this, but he said many times an employer will ask for a college degree, not because of the fact of the college, but because of the fact that the employee completed something. It takes work to be able to go through all the years to be able to get those courses. So it tells the employer this prospective job applicant has done a completion of something.
It's also the fact that when there is high unemployment, that means there's more workers for every single job, right? A lot of applicants. Many organizations just automatically said that a degree was required, not because they really felt it was needed, but that would decrease their pool of applicants. Well, right now we're in the opposite situation where organizations need, in most cases, to increase their applicants, but obviously to still be able to find people who are qualified. There are certification programs There are some organizations that require you to have finished specific certifications before you can go work with them. If you think about our military, we have many, many military who are working with the most sophisticated technologies available, but they may not have degrees in software technology, software IT. So, it might be a really significant thing that you don't actually require a degree. Think about Steve Jobs, right? I think he was probably our most famous one who didn't finish his degree, and
Bill Gates.
or Bill Gates.
Yeah.
Look where they've gone. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they did pretty good. Right. Robin, it was a fascinating survey and put out by the conference board. I look forward. I hope to talk to you some more. We very much appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me, Andre.
Thank you, Robin. Hey, if you've got a question, maybe a comment about the show, we'd love to hear from you. Make it concise, make it pithy. Write us at andre@benecapital.com. So let's take a look at the markets heading into next week. But before we do that, on this day, September 1, in 1897, Thomas Edison patented the kinetograph. What did Edison decide to rename it? We've got the answer coming up. Well, on this day in 1897, Thomas Edison patented the kinetograph. What did Edison decide to rename it? The movie camera. Good idea. Well, if you're a business accepting Visa and MasterCard as payments, be prepared to be paying a higher fee. According to the Wall Street Journal, an increase will be starting next month. Merchants paid an estimated $93 billion to both the card companies to swipe fees, and part of these fees are called interchange fees that go towards funding popular credit card program rewards as airlines and hotel points. Merchants then pass along the cost to consumers either by price increases or add-on credit card fees. A federal judge says Burger King will have to face a federal lawsuit of false advertisement. A class action lawsuit in Florida stated that the burger appears much larger on advertisement than in real life. Well, I assume the jury will decide on holding the mayo or the pickles if they desire. Well, August was down for all the indexes, which was somewhat expected, being August is one of the worst months for the stock market. And the other months are February and September. Well, last September, the S&P was down almost 9.5%, and that beat 2021 and 2020. So, will this September be a September to remember or one to forget? Next week, to help us with that question, will be Morgan Stanley's Jim Spiro. Jim was named as one of the top 100 investor advisors in the United States. How should the market do for the remainder of this month? We'll find out. That's our show for Friday, September the 1st. Our thanks to Robin Erickson for being with us tonight, but always we appreciate you for allowing us into your homes this evening. Have a fun weekend with the ones you love and a happy Labor Day. Also, I'll see you next week. Remember, if it's Friday, it's Wall Street Wrap-Up. I'm Andre Laborde. Also remember, money never sleeps. Good night.
Wall Street Wrap-Up is supported by Bambulas, featuring live music and coming soon, tapas and wine upstairs. Bambulas, the heartbeat of Frenchman Street.